You guys keep commenting about doing a future bounce tutorial, so let's bounce. I picked the song Quantum by Garrix and Brooks. I'll show you everything they do from the break to the build up to the drop, and deconstruct the plugins they use. Plus, download the free FLP in the description to help you learn faster. First, the pluck jumped out at me. It's used both to create atmosphere and tension immediately from the start, and plays during the break, with new elements constantly being added. This pluck has 3 layers. The main pluck is more in the middle of the stereo field, the second layer is wider to fill up the stereo, and the third is a guitar sounding layer for an organic touch. Cool, now let's break down the chords. Marty and Brooks use plucky chords with real guitar chords for the break. I started with a guitar sound preset that defines the character of the sound. This guitar sound emphasizes the guitar vibe even more. I filled up the high end by downsampling distortion inside Serum. Next, plucky saw chord sound for warmth and that delicious Martin Garrix flavor. Bass guitar to fill the low end. I also recorded my own guitar, which sounds like shit, but hardly noticeable in the final mix, while adding a nice realistic touch. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Details make the sound, otherwise your track sounds boring. So I added an ambient sample throughout almost the whole track, with small sprinkles of an ARP every now and then, and of course crackle. To drive the track forward and get you ready for the drop, it starts with pre-shifted claps. With a hat here and there, after 8 more bars, more stuff is thrown in. We hear shakers and hats more frequently. I link all these drums to the same mix bus and compress them as one, making them sound like a full loop, not just a loose one-shot. Tape saturation makes them sound a bit warmer and fuller. Room reverb gives them their own space in the mix. Finally, transient designer to reduce some sustain. This makes the drums sound less weak. Now don't be deceived, this is basically the lead drop but with a filter. By using good old fruity filter to cut off the higher frequencies to smoothly introduce it and prepare you for the drop. We'll get back to this. Everything up to this point sounds like this. Hear how it's evolving with new sounds constantly being added in? That is important. As is... Brooks is a master of the bass. By layering, he achieves a powerful sound, and I stress layering is key. Alone, these sound dull. Together, so cool. Start with a typical future bounce bass. Add a layer with a touch of high end. I cut out most of the low end and mid frequencies because this bass is destined for the high end and the high end alone. Next, detune saw for those extra mid frequencies. Tasty. Now some robo feeling with this next layer. Let's make it wider, and a sub bass to fill up the low end. By cutting out the low end from the previous bass, this sub bass really has room to shine. Link them all to the same mixer bus and compress them together so they sound like one huge big bad bass. Tape saturation gives it a warm and full sound. Boosting SSL EQ to 300 Hz frequency makes it sound less thin, and a clipper catches the peaks and reduces it to sound more smooth. 2 decibels is my maximum. Brooks uses these to make the bass come alive, so I did too. Just add them onto the main bass. The lead works with automation. Automating the pitch of a synth is what brings it alive. Brooks uses this in almost all his tracks. It's a simple saw wave table together with some white noise. Inside effects section in Serum, we use tube distortion to make it wider, and very short reverb for the space in the mix. Also link LFO to the fine tune of wavetable to make it sound more analog. Done and done. Now to the mix. First cut the low end frequency so lead doesn't clash with the sub bass. Next, EQ to shape the sound more like the original. Compression to control the sound. Clipper to make it more powerful. Saturation to make the harmonies pop, giving a fuller and richer lead. Delay for cool effect and a wider feeling versus plain old mono. And link the lead to a send channel, adding reverb on full wet mode. Sometimes I let another layer play the lead. This makes the lead more interesting. Heavy distortion gives it a cool sound, and room reverb widens it more. I cut out some of the frequencies that were too present, and this bus is also sent to the bus with reverb on. In fact, all atmosphere elements are linked to this bus. Now, the drop sounds with only a kick drum playing with drop claps. Brooks loves this. It makes the kick extra punchy and adds energy to the drop. Use downlifters to give an extra impact when the drop starts. Later, add drop claps and hats to the loop. These are the same as in the break. So how to... Transitioning between the break and the drop, start by adding 3 snares. All processed in the same bus, but the compressor makes them a bit more tighter. Another compressor to glue them together, and EQ to shape the sound to my taste. Stuff like boosting 2 kHz for more snap. Room reverb to put the snares in their own space. Transient shaper to reduce sustain. Then create tension with uplifters and risers preparing for the drop. With a vocal sample to create the atmosphere and define the vibe. Filter drop lead stays during the build-up. More sound is added to keep things interesting. A wider lead to sit on top of the main lead. This sample is out of my Elevation Future Bounce sample pack, which has 340 samples and loops and 160 presets with 5 FLPs included, to make producing Future Bounce way faster and easier. Back to the tutorial. Room reverb to make it wider, distortion for character. Compressor to keep the lead in control, with some EQ to sit in the mix in a nice way without clashing with the main lead. Onto the... Okay, the chords are introduced in an interesting way, with the LFO linked to the cutoff filter. Increasing the rate of LFO gives it a cool effect. For chord construction, we have a basic saw chord sound, which is a Garrix classic, a violin sound preset from my elevation pack, add a respace to fill up the low end of the track, tape saturation to add warmth to the bass, while filtering out our higher frequencies as to not interfere with the chords, but sit under them. For the drums, keep the same ones as in the first break. Now for the epic part. This instrument sounds like a stylophone, but I had to remake it. We keep the same bass as in the drop, so nothing to explain here. The lead on its own sounds like this. Import a sample of a real stylophone into the wavetable. The cool feeling comes from a filter I used in sample hold mode. Now it has a crispy high end that is typical for this lead sound. To continue the mix, add sound goodizer to compress the sound and make it more high end, more spicy. Distortion to make it fuller, compress to tame the sound a bit, making it even, not so jumpy in volume. Cut out some low end to avoid clashing with the bass. Saturation to make the harmonic sound more exciting, EQ to shape the sound, SSL EQ to boost some of the mid frequencies and make it sound fuller, then multi-band compressor to control high end, preventing sound from becoming too harsh. Chorus makes it sound wider, a short little reverb to put it in a nice space, then it's the lead to a bus with longer reverb on it. Make sure you automate the volume, and now add a short white noise layer to give more attack to the lead. And remember, the lead is layered with an extra layer as shown before in the drop. And introduce this section with a sick bass, one shot to create a good impact. Guys, keep things subtle while mastering. If you need big changes, you know your mix is not on point, and mastering won't fix that. My mastering goes like this. Endless smile for a washout effect. Automating the wet knob to increase during the buildup and be more impactful. Fruity balance to control volume throughout the track. Removing a bit where the drop in gives it more impact. Multi-band compressor to tighten the low end and tame the highs a bit to avoid too much of a harsh sound. Adding EQ to shape the tone towards the original while reducing muddy frequencies around 200 and 400 Hz. And a low end mono. Now EQ in linear phase mode, which is so important to avoid picking up the phase of the track while using EQ, but the big magic is the PSP vintage warmer, which Brooke loves. It compresses the track a bit, boosts the low end and high end around 1 decibel, and glue compressor brings it all together, making it sound whole. And of course a limiter to set the loudness, which is pretty standard, which leaves us with this banger of a track. Thanks Garrix and Brooks for making it, thanks to you for watching me remake it, and download the free FLP in the description. That's it. Peace.